here was our cliffhanger from last time. Our cliffhanger from last time was, if you remember, right, we had to do two things if we added a question. We had to update the array, and we had to update a constant in our JavaScript. That violates sort of a prime tenet of programming, the DRY principle, do not repeat yourself. So ideally, if I'm changing the number of questions, as far as the page that displays it goes, I should only have to change it in one place. And here I have to change it in two places. So we'll take a look at the code in a second here to refresh your memory. And then we'll talk about how we can fix that. Because there's almost always a way to fix something. All right? Not always, but almost always. Now, again, DIY is a principle. There are times that, for whatever reason, you know, practicality or whatever, you know, you don't follow it to a T. But again, that's sort of our guiding light. All right, let's look at the code. We went and we essentially created an array that contains our questions. So we're doing an addition quiz, so we have two arrays, the first number to be added, the second number to be added. And we then went and we converted the quiz to handle multiple questions. Essentially what we did is we did a couple things. We got it to work with one first, then we followed a naming convention for things. In other words, each answer was called answer something, where that something was a number, starting with 0 and going through however many questions there are. We did that then because it's easy then to write a loop. You put a loop around it. You do a for loop for I equals 0 through I less than a certain number, I plus plus each time through. All right? And then you can concatenate that number to the end of the word that you have, and you're good to go. So for example, here when we're looping through, to form our URL that's going to be requested, the field is called answer some number. Answer 0, answer 1, answer 2. So we loop through and we essentially add that number to the end of the word answer. And that's how we can form the query string that for the variable number of elements. And we do a similar thing on the server side, and we do a similar thing when we are creating and displaying the form. We have a loop that goes through, and where are we at here? Oh, where we display the form, we have a loop that goes through the same number of things, the same number of iterations, and prints out the problem, and then creates a text box for the answer called answer and the value. Now, our problem was this. Any questions about that so far? Our problem was this, that when I'm forming the URL, I had to hard code the questions as 2. All right? Which means that if I go and add an element to the include file, if I add another problem here, I have to go in and change that. Anytime you have to do a couple of things when you make one change, there's always a chance that you're going to do something that's going to be inconsistent. You're going to take a question away and forget to adjust it, or you're going to add a question or whatever. So it would be great if all I had to do, if I could make this purely data-driven. All right? Data-driven means all I have to change is the data, and the code takes care of the rest. How can I make it so that I'm not hard-coding this value in?
You want some sort of variable that kind of feeds off the array elements.
Okay. That's true. You want a variable that is going to feed off of the array elements. Where is that variable going to live? All right? I don't mean Illyria or Sheffield or anything like that. I mean, is it going to live in the JavaScript or is it going to live in the PHP? Okay. I mean, you're on the right track, but I guess the more basic question is it going to be in PHP or is it going to be in JavaScript?
Well, right now your array is in PHP.
Okay, so the array is in PHP. All right? And so therefore, the code that's going to pop in the number of elements in the array probably is going to be in PHP as well. All right? So that's a good observation. Let's look at it from a different perspective. Let's look at the roles of these technologies in doing an Ajax application. The server-side code is responsible, not just in Ajax, but all server-side code is responsible for generating the web page. In this case, we have an array in our PHP include file, and we loop through and create the proper input tags. So, the server-side code, the PHP, is generating the web page. So this is on the initial load. The JavaScript, in this case, handles or makes changes or deals with interactivity on a already loaded page. All right? And in our case, the interactivity is the Ajax grading of it. So that when we click the button to grade it, the JavaScript generates a request to the server and returns a piece of data. So this is sort of on the Ajax side. JavaScript deals with the interactivity, in this case, grading the quiz. When I say it deals with the interactivity, it gets the ball in motion. It makes a call to the server. It doesn't actually do the grading itself, but it forms a request, sends it to the server, and then handles the results. In the Ajax side of things, PHP is responsible for providing data. Let me add to this list here. The JavaScript makes request, handles result. Or response would probably be a better way to say it. That's on the Ajax side of things. PHP is responsible for providing data. In this case, it's responsible for providing a list of yeses and nos, whether they got the question right or wrong. So, at what point should we be dropping in that number of elements? In the creation phase or in the Ajax phase? In the creation phase, right? We want to make sure that when that page is loaded, it's loaded with the proper number in there. All right? And originally we did that via hard coding by putting in 2. All right. Since PHP is responsible for the initial creation of the page, then it makes sense that we use PHP to create this and to set that variable. So how do we mix JavaScript and PHP? Can we mix JavaScript and PHP? Why not? We can mix we can mix PHP and HTML, can't we? How do the rules for mixing PHP and other stuff work? We have our PHP tag. When the server sees a PHP tag, it goes into PHP mode. All right? And it interprets the instructions between the start and end PHP declaration as PHP code, and it executes them. And whatever it outputs, it sends that to the browser. Okay? When we end the PHP declaration, we're back in HTML land, and it's treated as regular HTML land. So, essentially what we want to do is this. Right here in the code, when this page is being loaded initially, remember this is a PHP page, which means that within the PHP declarations, the server goes into PHP mode, executes the statements. All right? The stuff that's outside of the PHP declarations is just plain old HTML that just gets sent to the client as is. So, the server's processing this. Okay, it declares these arrays, blah, blah, blah. When we get to this line right here, what do we want to do? We want to pop out of HTML/JavaScript mode. We want to pop into PHP, and we want to replace this hard-coded 2 by outputting the number of elements in the array. So how would I do that? Put the PHP tag here that says, hey, I am no longer in HTML/JavaScript land. Then what would I do? Right. You're 99% correct. The 2% is 99 to 2% that you're off. The 1% that you're off is, instead of length, it's count in PHP. Okay? So that's the one part that's out. Is this all we need to do? We have to echo that. All right? Because remember, what we want to do is we want the PHP is writing the web page. How does PHP write the web page? Through those echo statements. It can have other statements to do all sorts of processing, but when it finally figures out what to do and it needs to send it to the browser, it does it via an echo. So echo that. So we've now written PHP code that writes a piece of JavaScript for us. All right? Writes a piece of JavaScript for us. Could we do that with CSS? You bet we could. All right? Let's do something silly. If it's 2 questions, if there's 2 questions in the quiz, let's make the background yellow. If there is more than 2, let's make the background pink. Okay, just something goofy. All right. So I'm going to copy this up in my CSS code. And I'm going to say if like in my HTML, I echo the exact HTML I want. Here I'm going to echo the exact CSS that I want. Now, I forgot what I exactly said. I think I said I'll make it yellow if it's or pink if it's greater than 2. So I'll say background pink. Otherwise, background yellow. All right, let me look at this. I think that looks correct. Yes, because remember, this is what we're outputting. Oh no, this is not what we're outputting. You're right. Okay. So
I'm sorry. At the end, does it still leave a semicolon or no? It'll still read it fine without
this one?
Yeah, inside the if statement. Will it read it fine if you don't have that? Like, I know in C# it'll be like you.
This one?
Any of them.
Yeah, if you have a single instruction, I don't think you need the
Okay.
semicolon.
I just wanted to be sure.
That's a good question, though. I guess I'm not 100% sure. I usually put them in to be safe. All right, so I'm going to save this.
They're both set to pink.
They're both set to pink. All right, so let's go and move this over and see if it works. Oh, I probably also want to change here to add another question. Now I'm doing something that is not very good here. I made a bunch of changes and now I'm going to test them all at once. It would be better if I went in and changed the number, test that part, make sure it's working, and then test the CSS. I'm feeling lucky today, but it's probably good practice to do a bit at a time. If there's one thing, and I repeat this over and over again, because despite my continual harping on it, students continue to try to do everything all at once. So maybe not you individually, but collectively. So that's the reason why I go over this over and over and over again. All right, let me copy this over to the server. And let's see what we have doing here. All right, it's pink, which is what it's supposed to be, right? Because we have more than 2. And our code said if there is more than 2, then make the background pink. And if we go in here and put in the answers, let's see. I didn't know I had to do math this morning. It answers all 3 of them. All right. So now, let's say we decide to go back to 2 questions. All right. If I go in here and change it back to 2 questions, all I have to do is change the array, and everything else should be taken care of. Make sure I saved it. I did. And I'm going to go copy this. And it's yellow. And it shows it as correct. All right. This is like the good news and the bad news of PHP. All right. The good news of PHP is that you can literally drop your PHP code anywhere you want to within your web page. So far, we've dropped it into everywhere. Right. We've dropped it into our JavaScript. We've dropped it into our CSS. We've always been dropping it into our HTML. And even more than that, we've dropped our PHP in the middle of a HTML tag, all right, to output an attribute, like right here. Where is it? Right here. Here's our HTML tag. We get right here to the answer, and we, in the middle of an HTML attribute, output the value of I to tack a number on the end of it. All right. That's powerful. That gives you tons of flexibility. It can also make for very confusing code. All right. So this is where things like indenting, making functions, a lot of things like that come in handy for doing that. You know. You're given all this flexibility, but you need to apply some standards in the manner in which you code and format things to help make the code more readable, because otherwise you can create a real mess that's very difficult to read the code for. So that's sort of the challenge with PHP, is to harness that freedom and do it in a way where the code is still readable and the code is still maintainable. All right. Let's do a mind experiment. Let's say I wanted to change the way the quiz was graded. All right. Right now, I'm showing for each question whether it's right or wrong. And there's value in doing that if you were teaching students. There also might be value in me just telling the student how many questions they got right, and then they have to look and try to correct the ones they got wrong. All right, that way they have to think about the problems. What would I need to change to make this show the number right, or even a percentage or whatever, instead of showing the individual questions right or wrong? Yes?
Create a loop that goes through and checks each one. It checks it by comparing, like adding them together, so you can put the input equals the answer. If it does, we have a counter that adds up correct, and if it doesn't, we have a counter that adds up incorrect, and at the end, display counter results.
Okay, where does that live?
I guess on the page, because it's grading on the page, right?
When you say on the page, what do you mean?
Like in the page, on the page, does that make sense? Like,
Do we want to do this when we generate the data that goes back to the client?
After that, because they enter it in, right?
Right. Okay. Remember, PHP does two things in Ajax. It generates the initial page. That, obviously, it can't happen there, right? Because they haven't even answered the question yet. How can we tell them you got two wrong, before they even had a chance to answer? So, the second thing PHP does on the page is it takes the input from the client and gives back some information. All right? Do we want to change that? Someone else want to have any input here?
Couldn't you have the server side component of it kind of do a kind of like an error count?
Okay. The choices are, and you got a 50-50 chance to get this one right? And let me rephrase that. You could do it either way, and it could be reasonably done either way. But your choices of where to do it, this is clearly not in the initial generation of the page, so this is in the Ajax phase. All right. In terms of what we need to change, we could either change what the server's doing or what the client is doing. All right? We could either provide the client from the server a tally of how many questions they got correct. I think that's what both of you were saying. Or we could leave the server unchanged. All right? We don't have to touch the server-side code. Where would we have to do the tallying then? Well, there's only one other option, right? We'd have to do it on the client side. So
would you kind of have like a function that on the client side that literally counts how many corrects or incorrects?
exactly. All right, let's again look at this. And you could do this either way, but I'm going to make an argument for doing it on the client side. All right? Let's consider the Ajax component of it. JavaScript. When the button is clicked, it makes a request to the server, and it calls grade.php and it passes on the query string the values. And so on. So it makes an XML HTTP request, an Ajax request, when the button is clicked, and it sends that to the server. The server right now does what? The server gives back a string that contains a series of YNs, Ys, and so on. Okay, so the server responds with this. Right now, what does the client do? Right now, the client loops through, well, the client splits the string into an array, splits that string into an array. So when this is done with that splitting instruction, we have an array with as many elements as we have Ys and Ns. It loops through array and puts message next to each answer, whether it's correct or incorrect. So that's what it currently does now. All right?
So you just loop through instead of for Y and
Exactly. We could still have the server return that. That gives the client enough information to figure out what to do, right? I mean, the only difference is when we loop through the array, instead of putting a message next to individually, we're going to tally up the number of right, and we're going to output that on the page. All right? Now, the question is why do one way or another? Because I certainly could change a server to give me a count of the number of right and have the client side display that. Yes?
I want to know which ones are right and which ones are wrong in case we have to display it.
Exactly. This is more flexible. All right? And this is a more pure separation of the role of the client and the server. What does the server do? The server gives data. All right? This is a more complete picture of the results of the quiz. How we choose to display that is the client. So, for example, we could make it so that originally it shows the number of answers right or wrong, but if they click a button, then it shows which answers are right, which individual answers are right and wrong. All right? This just gives us more flexibility. Remember, as far as data goes, you can always take the detailed data and summarize it. Right? This is a detailed data. This tells me for every question whether they got it right or wrong. You can always take the detailed data and summarize it. You can't take summary data and pull out the detail from it. So if I gave that you had 3 questions right, there's no way of knowing from that which 3. But if I give the answers to the individual ones, I can go add it up. So again, the server is best off giving the complete answer to the client and let the client decide how to do that. We could theoretically have a couple different web pages calling the same server script. And one of them displays each answer, whether it's right or wrong, and one of them simply displays a count of answers. All right? So by doing it this way, we sort of allow for the greatest flexibility because we're giving all the data to the client and the client's deciding what to do with it. The client side, again, is responsible for forming and displaying the data, the user interface. So I'm not really changing the data here. I'm changing the way the user wants to see the data here. So I could go and do that. So let's go and look and let's make that change. This also has the advantage, by the way, if I change it on the server side, I'd also have to make some changes on the client side as well. Now the data is coming in a different place. I no longer have to split the array. I no longer have to do that. Right? So therefore, I'm still going to have to change the client side if I change the server side. Whereas I can change the client side without changing the server side. So that's another small motivating factor in this one. So here's the function that currently handles a result. There we go. And as you can see, remember the result is coming back from the server as a string of y or n separated by commas. So, if ready state equals 4, what does that mean? That means the server has supplied the final answer. Alright. We split that HTTP response text using a comma, so we're creating an array. So, if there is answer, comma, answer, comma, answer, it's going to split it into an array that contains 3 elements, and that array will be called results. HTTP response text, remember, is where the server puts the response. All right. HTTP is the pipeline between the client and the server. All right. And depending on exactly how we make the call, response text is one of the 2 places where the answer can be. Next week we'll talk about the second place the answer could be. I thought we were going to do it this week, but we'll do it next week. All right. So the answer, depending on exactly how we do this request, one of the places it could be is response text, and that's where it is in this case. I'm going to loop through the array. And for each array element, I'm going to look to see if it's right or wrong. And if it's right, I'm going to mark it as right. If it's wrong, I'm going to mark it as wrong. What would I do now to show simply the number of questions correct? I'd make a counter. I'm going to make a variable called correct equals 0. As I loop through here, if the answer is yes, all I do is increment correct. And when I am all done, I'm going to add a add a span at the very end because I don't want to show this for every question. I just want to show one number. And I'm going to then document get element by ID. Can you believe it? I just typed that in 2 seconds ago and I forgot what I called it. Number correct. Inner HTML equals correct. If I've done this correctly, I should see in here, okay, I did something incorrectly moving the files over. Let's try this again, take 2. Alright, there we go. If I do this correctly, I type in, so I should have 1 correct, and sure enough, there I go.
As long as you only make this once, it's good. I think maybe in PHP you add an extra bracket in there.
Where's that?
After the if statement, then do the next one.
That belongs to the 4. Alright. For I equals 0, I less than results length, I plus plus.
Is it because every time it moves
Oh yeah,
0?
I have correct equals 0 in the loop. Oh my goodness, it's been a long semester. So it works for 0 and 1, doesn't work for 2. Oh boy. Alright. Now we should be back in business. And I put in 6 and 12, and I get 2 correct. I put in some other number, I get 1 correct, I put in some other number, and I get 0 correct. Alright. Sort of the message of that is that think of the server as responding with data. And if it responds with the most complete data as possible, then it can be up to the client on how to display it. Let me give another for instance. If you remember back in the first version of this, we were setting an image to show a dog based on whether it was right or wrong. Now you could write the code to have the server return the dog image that you want to display. All right? But, again, we may not actually want to display a dog image. We changed it in this case, so we're not just showing that. Formatting the output is the job of the client. So the server should simply supply the raw data. So anything that deals with the appearance on how it should look or whatever, that should come from the client. All right, and if you do that, that's sort of like an extension of our principle in just general principle of web development, where the HTML is responsible for the content, the CSS is responsible for the formatting, sort of the same idea. The PHP is responsible for providing the data, the client side, JavaScript is responsible for formatting and displaying the data. Okay. Next week, I'm not going to be here Monday. I just remembered that. I knew that, but I just remembered that. So I will post an announcement to Angel reminding you. But I am going to have posted, in fact I have posted now, a dictionary example. Alright? And I have two versions of it. I have an original and I have sort of a new and improved. This example shows three ways that we can format the data from the server coming over to the client. There's a delimited way, there's a JSON way, and there's an XML way. So, next week, given we're not having class on Monday, if you would take a look at the delimited method, and I'll show you how it works, but if you take a look at the code, then we will discuss that when I return on Wednesday. This is a little Ajax application to translate English mathematical terms into Spanish. So the way it works is as I type in a term, it shows me the list of possible English terms that start with A. So as I type in AD, it shows me all those that start with AD. When I pick the one that I want and select it, and then click Go, it gives me the Spanish translation for it.
That's wrong. Just kidding.
I do not know if it's right or wrong. The reason, I'll tell you, the reason that I use this example is because I was able to easily get a file that I could format and create the arrays from. So I played around importing stuff into Excel and all that, and this is the data it worked the best for. So, hey, if it's not right, I guess we have to go to whoever originally created this list. All right. This actually has two Ajax requests. All right. One Ajax request happens when the user starts typing in the word in the text box. So when you type in the word in the text box, the user, or as the user types in each successive letter, a request is made to the server to get the list of words that match that string. All right, so that's Ajax request number 1. Ajax request number 2 is, once I pick one of the terms and click go, another Ajax request is sent to send the translation over to the client. So there's actually 2 Ajax requests going on here. So take a look at that. We do this, I'm doing the same thing 3 different ways. Using delimited data, which is what we've been using so far, comma delimited data. There's also 2 other formats for data, JSON and XML. And we'll take a look at those next week. All right. We'll see you over in lab.